Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
I see people still joining, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Tiago Forte, and I am hosting this sort of combined interview, demo, Q&A, and conversation with Oliver. How do you say your last name? Is it Sauter?
Yeah, that's pretty correct, actually.
Good enough for an American.
Good enough for now, safe enough to try.
Cool. And this call is, so it's going to be a number of things. I really encourage you all attending live to participate. If you see the chat button in the Zoom toolbar, I heavily encourage its use. You can put in comments, questions. Many of you will have links to other resources or things that you also recommend people look at. I will be occasionally frequently checking into the chat for questions and kind of things to surface to Oliver. Oliver, I find often the guest wants to keep the chat closed because it can be quite distracting. So I'll leave that up to you. But I will surface questions from there for you. And if we have a chance later on, we can even possibly take some live questions, in which case I'll just ask you to unmute yourself. But usually the first part is kind of just the background and the basics and kind of the overview of the subject, which today is the Memex knowledge management platform, which Oliver is a co-founder of. I think we're also going to talk about, I think it's called StoreHub, which I believe is something like the underlying platform or technology or something. But yeah, Oliver, thank you for being here so much. And why don't you kick us off by just giving us briefly, because I know you've written about it elsewhere and your website is very informative. Who are you? What's your background? And what is Memex?
Cool. First of all, thanks for having me. And it was lovely to see you again after these months. And now having made some good progress on it. Yeah, so I'm Oliver. I'm from Germany. The Black Forest, that's reflected in my nickname on Twitter. And I've been founding this company, WorldBrain, about 5 years ago with the research on how do we make more sustainable, effective, and compassionate decisions as a global society, because we have so many problems that our current sense-making and decision-making methods cannot solve in time for like bleakly our survival. And so, yeah, this has led me through multiple iterations of the product. In the beginning, trying to build a fact-checking community, but realizing pretty soon that it's so much editorial work and one perspective is not what it's needed. Like, in order to solve this misinformation sense-making crisis, we need to be able to have multiple perspectives. And we need to be able to compare them and then have kind of like be able to develop the intuition for these shared truths and iteratively improve on these shared truths so that in the end we come to this, what we call nowadays objective truths, like gravity. Like this was a debated topic a couple hundred years ago. So this is basically the mindset behind what we built here. With Memex and WorldBrain. And Memex itself has the goal, or was the intention, that it was clear that every one of us is doing online research and creates so much knowledge valuable to other people, but it's very hard to capture because it's so nuanced, it's very dependent on the workflow you're having. And so it's clear that no one will ever go and do the additional work of like collecting all of their knowledge and put it into a shareable format. Wikipedia is like a one-hit wonder when it comes to crowdsourcing knowledge in that form. And so it's clear that we need to have a single user utility tool that is able to capture a lot of the processes that people do online in a very privacy-focused way, that then allow them to share with less and less friction all of the views they gather while evaluating online content. So for example, if you guys read stuff online, you have very particular heuristics with which you select content, integrate it into your note-taking apps, etc. And Memex is here to be able to capture those. And Memex is trying to do so by enabling you to ease the information overload that you already have when doing online research. And this is kind of this Web 1.50 situation where all of the tools we're having are these silos, and we're now seeing this emergence of connected or networked thoughts. And Memex, I would contextualize in the kind of workflows that online researchers have, is kind of before the step, the interface between the web content that people see and consume and the synthesis process that happens in, for example, apps like Notion, Roam, or Evernote, and basically allowing people to evaluate and curate and co-curate those streams of information better. Yeah, that's cool. Roughly the kind of frame. I guess like later when we do the demo, it will become a bit more clear what the actual features are that help you do that.
Yeah, I do definitely want to see it. But to talk a little bit about, I remember when we talked, whenever that was, a year ago or something, you had such a strong view about, well, I'll let you talk about it, but sort of like the nexus of privacy, security, portability. Like, I feel like you founded this company with such a, not just a vague philosophy, yes, things should be secure, but like the company seems built on really strong principles. Can you talk about how that went into the creation of the software?
Sure. Yeah, indeed, it's very important the way we build the software. So we recognize that everyone has different knowledge workflows. So you cannot build a one-size-fits-all tool that is capable of capturing the workflows of 1 billion people plus. You need to have thousands of different tools that interoperate and where people can switch and innovate on the tooling they use. More like, if I would compare it, like more like an email for knowledge management, where a protocol helps you to communicate and to move between providers, less so than an Evernote, where it's a single application trying to, or a Notion trying to capture all of the workflows that a user has. And so fundamental to enabling the kind of diversity that is necessary are two things. One is the company and the software is built on as much data ownership as possible. Meaning, for example, all the data in Memex is stored locally. And so you can innovate on that data. You can build new interfaces later on, not yet, later on the Memex data that is there. And you'll be able to like migrate to other tools as you wish. Migrate your database to a Memex that suits your particular workflow just a little bit better. And I don't have these barriers. And this is super important to allow people to adapt their online research or knowledge management processes. And yeah, so that's principle number one. And the second principle is more on the economic side of our company. So we also need to recognize or answer the question, why do the tools that we use nowadays centralize so much? Like, why do they lock you into their services? Why do they make it hard for you to leave? Because most people that found these companies are idealists too. But at some point they end up like building these walled gardens that allow you not to innovate on your workflow anymore. And we found the root cause is in the way companies reward people taking risk. And this means people who are investors in either money, like VCs, for example, or the team that invests time. And what usually happens is they get shares. And when they get shares, essentially the economic incentive is geared towards infinite growth. Like there's no cap. So people try to maximize their growth as much as possible. And at some point, this is not possible anymore without making it really difficult for your users to leave to other services or interoperate with other tools. And so we use an economic reward model called Stewart ownership. Essentially, it follows two principles. One is the company can never be sold. So there is no exit. There is no market that can actually rip you out of the control of where your company is going. if you think about big companies that have an IPO, they're forced by the market to maximize shareholder profits, and so that's not possible anymore. And the second principle is the people are rewarded with a capped profit share. This means, for example, if an investor invests 100,000 euros and the cap is defined with, say, a 6x for a seed early stage company, then whenever that cap is returned, the company has no obligations anymore towards the investor, and the return needs to happen with profits, meaning the company needs to be actually engaging in building a profitable service from the very start, and cannot engage in these tactics of, oh, let's inject 10 million into the company, grow to, 10 million users, and then make the company and make the service either hard to leave or super expensive, or any other form of exploitation from that dominant position in the market. And so, yeah, we took these two strategic approaches in order to give our company the incentive to give away a lot of economic opportunity into the market of other knowledge management apps in case we get big. And this flows through all of our design decisions when it comes to building, for example, StoreX Hub, this data infrastructure, which I'm showing in a bit. Yeah.
Very cool. I like it. It's so interesting for me to see that this category of software, knowledge management, sense making, context building, whatever you called it, is so, the nature of the underlying company is so much more important than other categories, or at least people are much more interested. They want to know who owns it, what are the incentives, what is the ownership structure, what are all these things, and it's fascinating to see innovation happening there. One more question from me, and then I want to see at least a quick demo, the first part of your demo, then we'll get to questions. So I see Massimo has kicked us off with a question here in the chat. I'd like to have more going there so that I can kind of pick and draw from different ones based on what we're talking about. So go ahead, and if you have, can be very broad and general or very specific. Ideally, questions that will provide value to others is the one guideline I'd say. You know, not like, hey, can you help me with my tech support issue with this one feature on my app? That's not really valuable to anyone else. So think of questions whose answers will actually be broadly valuable. So go ahead and put in the questions. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But my other question I wanted to ask before seeing the demo is your relation. So give us the context around your inspirations. I'd seen online that you sort of put yourself in the like the Engelbart, Bush, Memex. I mean, the app is called Memex, so clearly you have a relationship to that legacy. But how do you see that? Are there like particular thinkers that you were particularly inspired by, or do you see yourself as different from other software programs that are inspired by Memex? Like, what's your thinking around that?
So that's an interesting question, because in the end, all the concepts and all the ideas that flow into Memex are not new, right? Even the name is an old concept, and steward ownership is 125 years old, has been invented by Bosch and Zeiss, is really like, I see the position in which we're in with the company is much like the situation in the world's history when inventions have happened at the same time in many different places, seemingly disconnected. But I feel like it's when that happens is because if you expose the human mind, the pattern recognition engine of the human mind, to the similar information, the likelihood it comes up with the same insight or solution is very high. And so what we're seeing right now with, for example, Rome, with Notion, or Obsidian, is these emergence of the network thought. Is how can we bridge these silos to actually map the tools that we're using more to the way our brain works, and through that enable us to actually cope with that information overload, because we're capable of using the full sense-making apparatus that is between our ears. So yeah, it's very hard to define what specific thinkers flow into this, because in the beginning, it was me just looking at a problem space and understanding, oh, here's a pattern. before I even got to know Engelbart et al. To draw from their inspirations.
Cool.
And yeah.
Very cool. And just one follow up to that, why do you think that pattern is emerging? I mean, besides the obvious, like the world, seemingly ending every day, what is the particular historical moment that is causing all these different thinking networks, creation tools to arise?
I think the natural limitation. Like, we realize that we are bombarded with so much information on a daily basis that it's clear that we're all in this kind of angst situation where like it causes a lot of anxiety, and whenever that arises, people come up with solutions, and then it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course, I have now like walked from Evernote to Notion to Rome, and every time I've been in these limitations of I cannot really connect my data because I'm not just using Rome or Notion, I'm also using email, I'm also using the browser, I'm also using all these different tools, and then it becomes very apparent, at least to my like gut feeling and pattern recognition.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's an interesting. It's funny. It's like what's really changed, I feel like, is social media. Like over, say, the last 5 years, I don't know of any like knowledge management technology, like, I don't know, a special graph database or something that is new within the last 5 or 10 years. They were all around, but what's different is the incoming flow. It's like the constant onslaught of suffering and noise and different people's opinions and alternate facts. That really seems to be the thing that's changing on an almost monthly basis, that is driving people's hunger for these things that in some cases have been around for decades. I'd love to hear eventually from Bill's website. Bill Seitz, who I see on here, whose website I've gone in great detail, is one of the most knowledgeable people about these tools and what's been around in the past. And he has an awesome wiki that you guys should all check out. I'm sure he'll post several links to it in the chat, as he usually does. But before we get to that, I want to see a demo. So I've really only seen static screenshots out there, or maybe quick videos. And I'd love for you to share your screen. I'll enable that here. I'm going to make you a co-host so you can share and show us how it works, what it looks like.
Sure. For sure. So, right. Do you guys see it?
Yeah, you might want to make the window fill the screen.
Sure.
There we go.
So, let's go to some other place.
And don't, just a quick note, Oliver, don't show anything that you don't want to be shared, because I will upload this to YouTube and stuff later.
This company is full on transparency. We even have our Notion task management board open. So
cool.
There's nothing that we hide. But thanks for the reminder. So there's a couple of problems that Memex solves. And the first use case I want to show is the situation that we all have these thousands of tabs open, or like bookmarks that we save but never see again because they're very hard to retrieve. But when we think about content that we saw in the past, then we have all these associative memories about it. Like, for example, the domain, simple words, which time frame. But this is not how we can search, and that's why we have to do all of that work in order to organize our knowledge, specifically when it's about online content. And with Memex, what you can do is you can full text search your entire browsing history, and you can filter down by certain things. So, for example, let's take a word that we see here, associative. Oh, wait, did I type this correctly? Oh no, I didn't. Here. So we see now all the content that has been visited with the word associative. And you can even say, oh, I want to filter by, is it bookmarked? Is it visited between a certain date? Does it have specific tags? Or is it from a certain domain? So I can, for example, say here, 2 hours ago.
And so it's capturing all this text just through you visiting the web pages?
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, this is all offline first. So of course, now that I do screen sharing, it's a bit slower because it's really like processing all locally. So all the data that is captured is completely offline first, and there's nothing shared with anyone except you sync it, then it's end-to-end encrypted, unless you later share it with followers, for example, curations that you make,
Okay.
or back it up to one of your cloud providers. But apart from that, by default, all data is stored locally.
So it's local data, but it works in the browser?
Yes, it's
Okay.
in the browser internal database.
Okay.
And you can also have like collections, like lists that you can sort stuff with. And you can really quickly organize when you're on the website. So for example, you see here in the top right corner, you have a little ribbon that pops up that you can bookmark pages. You can add a note, say, hey, what's up? Or you can add a tag, or you can straight add it to a collection that you have.
Cool.
And all of these are also activatable with keyboard shortcuts. Now I'm using B is for bookmarking it whenever I'm here. And you can also modify those if you like to.
Okay.
Or T, then I have a tag. I can type a tag. So for example, Zettel, Kasten.
Okay. So let's see. What's next? So you can search for that text. I'm assuming you can search for those comments that you made, but then what do you do with those things?
So I come to that in a second. I think the second feature is also really important, specifically when we're thinking about the topic of network thoughts. Mm-hmm. And that is the problem that whenever we do online research and have thoughts about the content that we're reading, we have to copy paste it into other apps. So you have to highlight specific things, copy that highlight, paste it into another application, and you really cannot add notes. And so what you can do with Memex is also, you can create annotations. This is cool. It's a bit slow right now.
This reminds me a bit of Hypothesis. Has that been an inspiration?
Yeah, we have been working with Hypothesis in the beginning, and also our anchoring library is from Hypothesis.
Cool. But it's what always bugs me about Hypothesis is it's so heavy. It's kind of heavyweight, and this feels quite a bit lighter.
Yeah, Hypothesis has also different focus on in terms of the users. They want to reach its more academic users, and also they're focusing more on the social aspects of it. Of Annotations, we're more, at least for now, focused on how can we increase the single user utility.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but to come to your question, what do you do with that content? So here we have multiple ways of what you can do. And as I said in the beginning, the contextualization of Memex is in this process of, hey, I have all this information that I research online. I want to have it saved without organizing it. And I want to retrieve it whenever I need it without organize it. Mm-hmm. And whenever I want to then reuse it, I need to be able to transfer it over into another application relatively quickly. Mm. Historically, we have been quite good to solve the first two use cases. So how do you not need to work to capture, and how do you still be able to organize and capture the thoughts you're having? And now we're in this process of the second step is how do we make it more possible to integrate it into your own workflows much better? And with a couple of features for that. One very practical feature is that we have just released the copy paster. So you can copy paste pages and notes in specific formats that you can define yourself into other applications. So say, for example, here's two templates that I created. One is a markdown for that page and one is a Roam to do. And so if you, for example, go to markdown and then you go to Notion, it's automatically in that markdown. So if I can show you here how this looks like, you have like a syntax that you can prepare, and you can also say, this is a cool page, for example. Save it, copy it again. This is a cool page.
Now, where does that link? Can you link into Memex entries, or does that go to the original Wikipedia page?
This goes to the original Wikipedia page. Where I come to that in a second. When we enter now this era of sharing, then linking into your database is also possible. But for now, it's only like the references that you have and the content that you have. So the actual content, so the URL and the title and the visit time, etc., that you can extract from the database entries that are there, but they're not linked yet into the database.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's the first part of like one of the features that we now implemented to make it possible to transfer stuff over. More useful in the mid and long run for people will be Storix Hub. So Storix Hub is now in alpha, but it can already be used to integrate Memex with basically any other application. It's a bit like a Zapier, an offline first Zapier, but with the difference that it also stores all the data that you process locally. And it's an application that runs on your local system and with which you then can connect different things. So for example, you can already index pages on demand. You can import and export, for example, annotations. You can organize stuff. So you can say, hey, please push this URL into this collection or tag it with that particular tag and things like that. And I can show you here on a demo. We integrated, our first integration is with Arweave, which is an archiving blockchain-y project that helps you to create permanent archives of whatever content you want to save. And the integration into the workflow is much like saying, okay, I'm going now to this page here, and then I tag it, for example, with share Arweave. So this is the integration. What it does is listening to all of the changes that happen in Memex, waits for those that are with this particular setting that the integration has, share Arweave, and then it detects a change in the Memex database. It will take a few seconds. And then essentially writes a new entry into, oh no, wait, I actually saved this page already. That's why it doesn't save it properly. Sometimes it's still a bit wonky. Ah yeah, now it detects a change. See the last entry?
Yeah.
And it will now process it and push it into the Arweave, in that specific Arweave block.
And so how does it work? Is Storix something that is user facing? Is it something that we have, as users, we have to install or manage, or is it just kind of working in the background? So
it's designed as a local daemon, but that you can manage much like a WordPress interface. And with more or less technical knowledge, you can do more or less things with it. You can build your own plugins. We will have kind of like a JSON-based recipe system where you can hook together different applications. You can, for example, say, hey, please listen to data changes in this app, and then process the data in a specific way and then push it into another app. So it becomes accessible to the kind of script kiddie audience that is able to understand a bit of code, but is not capable of writing an entire plugin, for example.
Okay. So is this, do you have, I wanted you to finish the first part of your demo so then we can get some questions on what you've already shown us. Is this a good time?
Yes, I think there's actually not much more about the current state of the tool to show, and we can move on to the next one.
Okay, so let me look at the chat here, and please keep posting your questions. I want to kind of riff off of Massimo's first question. Exporting and importing backups can be exhausting. He asks how you face this limitation. Massimo, if there's any more specific thing you want to add to that, feel free to unmute yourself. But he says, does Memex index the content from visited pages? Can I see a copy of the index pages?
So shall I answer or shall I wait for Massimo?
Yeah,
Hi.
go for it.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've been using it, let's say a couple of months ago, and I've been indexing maybe 5 or 10 gigabytes of materials, and it has been zipped and uploaded to Google Drive.
Wow.
When I reinstalled it, I've been waiting for, a couple of days, and still I don't have it back. I understand, it's alpha, it's beta, everything is fine, it's perfect, it's acceptable. But I was wondering what kind of limitation this might be to use it, heavily, intensely, different platform, mobile, synchronization. There's going to be a lot of data going back and forth. And so I was wondering if you know about this and how you're going to face it, just curiosity.
Yes, 10 gigabytes of data is a lot of data. So that's to start with. So probably that's the reason why it was not all fully there, because it needs to download it and reintegrate it into the indexing process. So just being cautious about that. Indeed, importing and exporting is one of those friction points that are super painful in every process. And one of the goals of Storix Hub is actually bringing the entire back-end logic or application logic of Memex into the local environment, so that all the apps that you might want to integrate with, you don't actually need to import export anymore. For example, you could say, hey, I want to build a new interface for my Memex data. I want to represent it as a graph. You build a new plugin that talks to your local host, to your local Storix Hub node, and you can represent the same data that is in Memex in a different form. So you actually don't have that import-export process anymore. Of course, in an offline-first environment, which we are here, syncing becomes a more cumbersome process, because you don't have like this always online available cloud. Although that might be at some point an architectural feature too, but not like by design. It's coming from an emergent offline-first data ownership, and if you want to share it, if you want to have a cloud instance, then it will be there.
Oliver, don't get me wrong. I might see it as a strong advantage against similar services, because I'm the kind of person with the collector fallacy, and Thiago knows well what it means. So I like to have, all the things that I'm browsing accessible. It's, I feel kind of thrilled to know that I can search for something I've been browsing 3 or 6 months ago. So I can see the value out of it. But so I think it's worth to pursue the path of making efficient. I was just wondering about heavy users as me, how you could manage such a huge bandwidth.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. And it's an ongoing process of improving the search. The problem is also in the browser, the speed is limited. And that's why we move it into the local environment, where we can use much more advanced search technologies. Even the full text search of SQLite is more performant than the IndexedDB database in the browser. And so, yeah, it's a process. First was to make it work.
I want to kind of add to there's a question from Steven, I think here that is cool. It kind of relates to this too, which is he notes that content comes in many forms, not just text. Documents, photos, music, video. How does Memex handle that kind of content first? Mm-hmm. And especially all the different ways that people have of visualizing, organizing, interacting with multimedia, basically.
Yeah, we started with web content, but we're aware that there's multiple content types. We're right now in the refactoring process of redesigning the sidebar to be able to be injected in multiple content types. So for example, in PDFs, in videos, in a reader, like an offline first reader that is already almost ready. That's the first part. And the second part of the refactoring process, which hopefully can start in the next half a year, is to refactor the dashboard to actually be capable of handling multiple types of content, and make that also hopefully a bit more generic, so that also people can, through Storix Hub, add different content types more easily, even if we haven't foreseen them yet in the design.
That's an interesting kind of side effect of focusing on web content, is it's sort of natively multimedia, right?
Because it's a link. That's how at least you can reference to it. That's the first goal. And if you really want to integrate it into your UI experience, then this is then the next step for us.
So I have a question about offline. So this is something interesting I've noticed, which is I travel a lot, and I spent a large part of my 20s overseas where internet connection was not reliable or was very expensive. So to me, when I first got into knowledge management, offline first capability, this was before mobile, so that would come later, but offline was an absolute requirement. It was like the #1 requirement. But I noticed many platforms these days aren't. I mean, Rome isn't. Notion has all sorts of problems trying to be offline. And I feel like it's not realistic to not have an offline component. Like, why did you, it sounds like you prioritize that pretty highly. What was your thinking around that? And why is offline first your approach?
You point to a couple of examples why it's important to have offline first, but the primary initial motivator was that we're handling pretty sensitive data. And we had a couple of competitors that failed or struggled to gain traction around this history search because no one wants to upload their entire history to a cloud service. And the matter of fact today is that you cannot have a performance search, at least when you want to extend the kind of metadata you want to search with, in an encrypted way. This means you need to have, like, for example, the data that's now saved in Memex is unencrypted on your local hard drive. It's encrypted by your operating system if you do that, like Mac OS or so. But yeah, so it was these two, is knowing that it has a lot of advantages. It's following our values that we want to give users the full control first. This means we had and will have to solve a couple of hard engineering problems. But in the end, it's worth it because the whole system will like orient itself from the user up and not from the cloud down.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting how depending on how you frame it, people have very different opinions. Like if you say, your book notes, oh yeah, those should definitely be cloud and based in the cloud and synced across all my devices, But then you say, how about your web history? No one wants their web history shared with even anyone. They don't even want to know their web history is like,
right. It's like accidentally searching, oops.
Yeah, seriously. So it's interesting because you solved the capture problem by saying, we're just going to capture it all just as you're browsing. And then that creates a new constraint. Every time you solve a problem, it creates a problem. So the new problem is, okay, now we need this to be private and locked down. But I kind of want to add on that based on Oren's question here, which is, so the other maybe #2 requirement for me is mobile access. Like I cannot like half my notes at least are entered while I'm on the go. And by on the go, I mean on my couch or just someplace not sitting. Like really, I have a life goal of spending as little of my time as possible sitting at a desktop computer, right? That is not where I want to spend my time. And it's kind of crazy to me. Like people don't remember that Evernote absolutely rose to success on the back of the iPhone. They were one of the first companies, like the week that the iPhone launched, Evernote said, we don't even know how we're going to do it, but we're going to support iOS. And they did. And that's really how they took off. They forget that history. And it was a really important history. And it's crazy to me that most of the new applications, maybe it's just because they're young, but so Oren asked, what's the Memex mobile experience, or at least the long-term vision of that? Oh, nice.
We have a mobile app and it's also offline first. So you can use it independent of Memex, the extension, if you like. What it currently affords to do is you can save things. So I can maybe show this real quick. If you click on share with, then you can click on Memex. It brings it up and it's already saved now. Like you don't have to do anything anymore. This is already saved, but you can, for example, add a note and save it too, or like categorize with tags and collections, and it's saved to your Memex, and it's full text indexed when it arrives in Memex.
So on mobile, you have to. It's different than desktop. You have to proactively do that.
Yes, on mobile we don't have access to the browser APIs, and we cannot. We could at some point maybe offer a proxy service that you can enter, and it would just like scrape all the content there, but it's not an area we wanted to go in yet. For now, it's really just this use case of, oh, I really quickly want to save stuff and I don't want to wait or like copy paste it again into an email or whatever. What we're about to launch is 2 other features, which is an offline reader. So all the pages that you save and that you classify, they should be offline readable based on a couple of settings, like have you annotated it, for example, is then offline available to read. And also to annotate, to highlight and annotate on the go. These are not yet in the app, but are available. And for now, what you can do is you can look at all your saved items. You can look at all your collections, for example, and can look at all the tags and the notes that you made on those pages. So that's synced. And again, offline first and end-to-end encrypted between the devices. So we actually never know what you're saving.
Okay, very cool. So Bruno, do you want to get on? And so there's something interesting here where I notice we're referencing so many other apps. Like it's just the background assumption is you're also going to use at least 1 or 2 or multiple other information management, products. So Bruno said, if I understand correctly, the Daemon Hub will connect using APIs to other services, but what about services with no API? Do you want to come on and clarify that, Bruno?
I think I already understand the question, but of course, please.
Go for it. I don't know if he has audio capability.
Yeah, I have audio. Well, I realized that many services recently are coming to the market with no API. That means they won't have an API afterward, but also the API is often part of some premium plan. So how is it going to happen? What is the plan, and how do you address?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't force all those companies to adopt APIs or like integrate those. Yeah, that's clear that we cannot influence their roadmap. In the end, what we hope for is that StoreX Hub gives users the ability to or users and developers, the ability to integrate when it's possible, or have maybe other hacks, like people build a Python script to build a kind of unofficial API for Notion. StoreX allows you to just hook into that API or into that script if you like to, and pump data through that pipeline. However you want to do it is up to you. If you build, for example, a other browser extension that is a text scraper for Roam and that pumps that into StoreX Hub, or when the API is available, copy your entire database and create an offline first mirror that you can analyze. Yeah, it's up to the community to integrate it. And that's the entire goal of StoreX or StoreX Hub, is acknowledging that the long tail of use cases is so long that one single service or one single integration cannot solve it all. And every one of us has different needs for an integration. And so it does not really, if we don't make in an offline first environment your knowledge workflows adaptable in a human-centric way, you will wait forever for your favorite tool to adopt a specific integration. And that's happened all the time, right? That you have maybe, I don't know, org mode or so, and you want to have an integration with Evernote, or like, because so little people use org mode, the Evernote like roadmap will never adopt org mode for a couple of users. But there's multiple tens of thousands of people that collectively make up a couple million users. And if we give them the power to do that from their vantage point, then it can create this kind of like bottom-up interoperability, where you could, for example, say, oh, right, here's Twitter and Mastodon, which are 2 Twitter-like services, and I want to download both the data sets, and I want to build my own data model that abstracts them away well enough that then can be shared with other people. And so suddenly you create an interoperability on the user or group level that then maybe spills into other services. And hopefully, and that's kind of the big bet here, is that once this openness and this freedom to move becomes as standard, it becomes very difficult for new providers to enter a market without an API and without that kind of integration that would allow you to actually move your data. Because people, and that's the gamble here, is that once you give people this kind of freedom, it's very hard to take away.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. I have a couple questions here about, so I like Achim's question about, you mentioned at the very beginning that you wanted to help people sort of be able to search for what he called ground truths, or find the truth, or just make sense of things.
Mm-hmm.
How can, I agree, there's something, so what is the exact link, like, of all the ways to do that? Like you mentioned the fact checking site and things.
Sure.
How exactly does someone equipped with Memex and these other tools, how are they better able to do that for themselves or for others?
Sure. If you don't mind, I share my screen again.
Yeah.
To show you a couple of mock-ups of features that we're now planning.
I love that. I love answering philosophical questions with software features.
Nice. So we had this like in the beginning I was saying, like, what we need is the ability to share subjective views, and for people to receive many subjective views, filter them in their own like sense making heuristics, and find the shared truth through the intuition they're developing for the information that is laid out in front of them. And the features that we have in mind to make this possible is, for example, this is now mock-ups, they're really low fidelity, but the ability to share collections with other people and follow those collections is the first step. Is saying, hey, here's a list of a repository of all the stuff that I've been researching about knowledge management or climate change or knowledge management or climate change. And you can follow those updates. And as a follower, you can follow multiple people and then have the ability to compare what is the content they're actually surfacing. And further, like taking the innovation a bit further, being able to, for example, search in those knowledge repositories. So you can suddenly skip Google and say like, oh, in Google, I actually have to filter out myself what is the kind of stuff that is valuable. And I need to have domain knowledge in most of the cases. But in the way humans acquire knowledge is always through proxy. It's always through, oh, I trust this person, and that's why I trust the information that comes from that person with a higher degree. And so what I want to do actually is to say, hey, how can I just search inside your previous knowledge and previous web history that you obviously shared with the people around you to get to quality information much faster. It's not going to be perfect. It's not claiming to be perfect because that's not possible, but it claims to become maybe an order of magnitude or more faster and more qualitative to get to really good content. So that's one, sharing repositories of information. And the second part is discussions, is to be able to share your annotations with other people and engage in conversation about those annotations in threads and really dissect content or like information on the, say, repository level through a conversation that happens on the collection, on the page level through a note, or on the actual sentence level or like granular level of a highlight or a segment of a video or a segment of a picture or these kind of things. And, or for example, to link together, like that's maybe a bit later because priorities and money is to link together the content from other pages or from other knowledge management applications. And this could be, for example, if someone builds a good integration to Roam, you could say, show me in the right side all of the mentions of the URL I'm currently visiting that is across my entire Roam database, but also the Roam database that I subscribe to from my friends. And through that, enriching your knowledge search and filtering experience with the collective knowledge of the people that you want to be exposed, the information that you want to be exposed to. One critical piece of infrastructure or architecture here is, this is all peer-to-peer. It might not be technologically peer-to-peer, but there's no central platform where you see a feed from people that you have no affiliation whatsoever with. It's not like on social media where you join a group and suddenly you see posts and comments from people that you've never seen, you've never heard of. And this is the entry point for trolling, is people just have the ability to post to 10,000 people without any filtering mechanism on the receiver end. Like, how do I actually make sense of these incoming streams?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's
very interesting. So how do you see this playing out? Like, is it, you've talked about like the balance between individual and group sense making, but 10 years from now, it's 2030 and you've accomplished all your goals. Did it happen because millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people downloaded this and themselves individually collected each piece of the puzzle? Or is it more like super nodes? Like certain very highly influential people do the work for us, build these perspectives, output them. Like, I know that's a spectrum and there's infinite options there, but how do you see that playing out?
You already halfway answered your question. In the end, it's really like, if you create a system that is built or designed for emergence, local hierarchies will emerge. There will be platforms that are much like Facebook that maybe collect multiple users, that create a Facebook-like experience. There will be super nodes of people that are more trusted in the network for specific domain areas, but not for others. And in the end, what we want to prevent is that Memex or WorldBrain becomes the tool. What we hope for is that Memex becomes a tool. And for example, a decision here is also, we didn't trademark Memex. We consider Memex to be a class of software. It's not our invention. Like, it's not our like trademark.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the philosophy that goes into, if you build a system that allows for these multiple tools to emerge, reputation will emerge, information exchange will emerge between the people where it should emerge.
Yeah. So now let's do, just for fun, let's do the opposite. 10 years from now, 2030, and you failed. You've utterly, completely crashed and burned. Why? What is the most likely cause of that? And part of that too is a question someone had here. Stewart ownership is so different. Like, normally for a startup, failure would be not having an exit. But you already said you don't want an exit. So what would failure even mean to you and your team?
Failure would be if we don't manage to kick off that ecosystem. And if we cannot contribute in a meaningful way to a system that reaches the level of interoperability that is necessary for the collective sense making.
Okay, great. But then my question is, what makes you think that ecosystem doesn't already exist? Like, what for you is it existing versus what needs to happen for you to be like, yeah, we kick this thing off?
For me, downloading a new application and using it with my existing data without needing to think about how do I migrate my data. For me, being able to communicate with friends using Facebook, but using a completely different tool. Like, not being locked into socially and on a data level in the tools that I'm using. Like, this kind of freedom to have that.
And for you, a combination of, I don't know, wiki software, Notion, public realm databases, they don't fulfill that?
Well, I guess the people here know very well the pain people have to go through in order to set up these complex systems because those frictions are there. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's possible in some local or specialized areas, but as long as you still have to think about, oh shit, I have all my friends in Facebook and I want to leave Facebook, but I can't because I lose so many connections if I do. As long as that is still there, then we haven't reached that goal.
Interesting. So an essential part of the ecosystem is decentralization, is portability, freedom, that kind of thing.
Yes. And yeah, and maybe that's also a good segue into the question about steward ownership. Like, you say that this will incentivize you to act more openly and sustainably. Why? Maybe that's good to explain here. So the problem, like the reason why companies need to lock you in is because there's no economic freedom to be more open. And that means every euro that the company loses by losing a user is directly correlated to the profits that the investors are going to make, or stakeholders and shareholders in the company. And this means there's always a conflict. This is always like a kind of win or lose scenario around the profit that is made. In a steward ownership environment, for example, you define in the contracts, 25% of our profits every month is going to go to buy back those shares or debts that we have towards our investors. So there's 75% of the profit suddenly that can be reinvested in many different ways. It can be reinvested in, for example, improving workers' like living conditions, supply chain sustainability, or to just say like, hey, our vision is actually to provide more open systems so it doesn't clash anymore. Like, it's okay to, at some point, for example, level off in profits. Say, for example, we managed to get to a scale of like making 100 million euros profits per year. In the existing system, this is not enough. The next year you need to make 120. And the next year you need to make 150. In the steward ownership system, you can say, well, if we make $100 million in profits per year, or like in revenue, even maybe only 20 million in profits, it makes so much cash that it's enough to pay out every single investor, to pay out everyone a fair salary, to pay out everyone a fair bonus, and reinvest stuff. And that freedom is not given in the current models. And so, yeah, that's how the bet is that we give ourselves this freedom. And to answer the question, the second part of the question, historically seen, the companies that deploy steward ownership become a very integral part in the ecology in which they're in, like the communities in which they're in, because they have these the ability to be free. For example, Zeiss is one of the major funders of the University of Jena and funds huge amounts of research, and does so because they're able to, because they don't have to give that money to shareholders. Or, by the way, Mozilla is a steward-owned company. Buffer is on the transition to be a steward-owned company. ShareTribe, John Lewis. Yeah, this is like, this is, and I think steward-owned companies in Denmark contribute to, maybe I'm wrong, like 30 to 40% of the stock market, like the value of IP companies that contribute to the national GDP. Because they have such a high concentration there.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. Okay, I want to wrap up on time, but last question seems to be popular: collections. So let's end on a practical note. I have a collection, I've done the work, I've learned the platform. How can I share my collection?
So the workflow, it's not yet there. By the way, just a quick note, if you guys were still in the user research process and want to find out what are exact workflows, if you want to chat with us, we're super happy. Jump on a call, 30 minutes with us, and book it at Calendly/WorldBrain. And yeah, just talk to us so we can find out what your exact use cases are. But to answer your last question, essentially the workflow that we have in mind now is a share button that gives you a link, and you can share that link in the very first iteration of the product. And people that have that link can view it online and can save stuff into their Memex when they're viewing these collections. And it's geared towards the type of user that wants to share knowledge to enrich other people's knowledge. So dubbing them as thought leaders or something like that. Or people that just are really into, sharing curations. People who use Twitter to share really valuable content, but are pissed off that it's this kind of ephemeral nature that you actually cannot use any of the knowledge that you shared there anymore because it's not searchable. It's very hard to retrieve. And so if you want to create more permanent and more long-lasting content curation, that first feature is for that.
Cool. I just put the link to your Calendly. And so as part of that, I want you to just end with, we have 50 people on the call. These are probably 50 of the biggest nerds about this stuff. Many of them publish their own content and influence others. Do you have any requests? Like how can we support you in your mission? What kind of feedback do you want? Are there certain kinds of people you'd like to talk to, or certain kinds of communities that you'd like to be connected to? Like what's your call to action for us here?
The first one was really engage with us in the user research. If you like what we're doing and you want to see this succeed, we have also a supporter plan, which gives you access to beta features and where we take you more in like a journey of like exactly this kind of research process. We're really public about it. Yeah, come talk to us, use the software, bring patience, because obviously these technologies are not kind of as performant as if you have a fat cloud server. So give us plenty of feedback once you use it. That's already the best help you can receive. And yeah, the kind of crowd that is interesting for us is here, right? That's why I reached out to you, Thiago, and thanks again for giving the opportunity to show this to your follower base or to this community. So I'm really thankful and looking forward to get in touch with many of you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Oliver, and for everyone else for making this such a lively discussion. And yeah, thanks for being here. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's really important. I think it's important a lot of different people approach the issue, and it is such a huge issue from many different angles. And so I'm happy to support. So yeah.
Cool. Looking forward to what comes.
Me too.
Sweet.
Okay, everyone. Have a great end of your week.
Thanks for all of your time.
See you later. Yeah, thank
Bye.
you so much for being here. Bye-bye.